I loved my wife. Let it be said right now. We have been together since school. We were good friends back then. She was my best friend. We went through a lot together, and when we realized that our feelings had grown into something more, we decided to act. We lost our virginity on her birthday, and I am proud that I was able to please her several times that night. We rented a motel room for this occasion, and thanks to the fact that her mother had put her on the pill a few months before this point, we were as protected as possible. It started out rather awkwardly, but by the second time we had found our rhythm. Kudos to adult films, which taught me a few tricks on how to give pleasure and other things. The book came in handy too. Let me introduce myself. I'm Cal Wilson. My height is 180 centimeters. I weigh about 80 kilograms. I don't stand on the scale every day. At 32, I'm fit and still running, going back to my high school and university athletics days. I have dark brown hair with a few early gray streaks, but my best feature, I've been told, is my emerald green eyes. I work as a detective for the local police. There's not a lot of crime in our small town, so my job is pretty quiet. My wife is Julie Wilson, née Julie Vickers. Yes, her mom added two ES to the end of her name to be original, apparently. But it is not important. Julie and I are that couple that everyone says we are made for each other. God, she's beautiful. Long brown hair, bright blue eyes, and a figure that could stop a war. Her parameters are 90-60-94. Height is 168 centimeters. She is also 32 years old. So after university, we decided to get married, and for 10 years we had a wonderful life. We studied the book on sex from cover to cover, and our sex life never faded. I treated her and arranged romantic dates several times a year, and not only on holidays. She works as a paralegal in one of two law firms in our city. Now about Jimmy Green, a guy who was a quarterback in high school, the one whose bread always falls butter side up if he drops it. In other words, he was the golden boy, until he suffered a knee injury that rendered him ineligible to play NCAA football. When he returned to the city, his father, the city's mayor, decided to get him a job in the mayor's office, which worked closely with the sheriff's department. Jimmy has always had a soft spot for Julie. He found us on dates when we were in high school, and although he had a girlfriend, he openly flirts with Julie in front of me and in front of his own girlfriend, Cynthia. Julie, God bless her, never reciprocate his feelings, although some of his words made her blush and angered me. I told him loud and clear that if he ever tried to win Julie, I would make him pay. He smiled and said that I had nothing to worry about, that it was just games. Jimmy and Cynthia married right after she graduated from college, and by then he had already been working at City Hall for a year. About a year ago, on a Friday night, Julie and I were making plans when I got a call from Sheriff Barton. He said he was sorry to bother me on my day off, but I had to go to work. I asked what was going on, and he said all the patrol cars were busy and there was a domestic violence call near my house. Since I was the closest, he said I could go there straight away. Sheriff Barton wouldn't take no for an answer, even though I was scheduled to have this evening off. Not wanting to cause trouble, I apologized to my wife, put on my badge, belt, and holster 357 caliber revolver, and headed to the address. As it turns out, Sue Roberts reported that her husband Hunter was beating her again. He was drunk as usual and decided to take his anger out on her and their children. It took me a while to convince him to give in, and I took him to the booking. Sue, as usual, refused to sue him. I, as always, told her to find help for him, and she, as always, promised to do this and get rid of all the alcohol in the house. I sighed in disappointment. Every couple of months, we received the exact same call about the exact same situation. However, tonight was a little different. I was doing paperwork in the office until midnight, and when I arrived home, I saw Jimmy and Julie sitting on the couch. Julie looked like she took another shower after I left. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. What the hell is he doing here? I thought. What's going on, Jimmy? Expensive, I said, leaning over and kissing her. Sorry about earlier. Hunter is back behind bars, and hopefully this time Sue will either leave him or find him help. Don't worry, dear. she answered with a smile. Cynthia went into town with her parents, and shortly after you left, Jimmy called to see if we were busy tonight. Yes, Guy, sorry about that. I didn't know you were on a date, Jimmy shrugged. I guess it's lucky you got called, huh? He had that same smug smile, and I was once again reminded that this guy is a real bastard of the first category. Now alarm bells are ringing in my head. Jimmy has always been the snake who thinks his shit smells like violets. I decided to be polite. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Jimmy. I mean about Cynthia. But if you don't mind, I'd like to take my wife to bed and try to make up for having to go to work tonight. Oh, of course, Guy. Sorry about that. He quickly stood up and left. I locked the door behind him and returned to Julie. Darling, I'm sorry about earlier, I said, hugging her. Next Friday, I'll tell him to call Bill or Dave for me, okay? Julie knew what it was like to be a cop's wife. She smiled. Everything is okay, dear. Jimmy and I just chatted for a bit, reminiscing about old times. I smiled. No problem, honey, I said, the alarm bells in my head gradually fading. Nothing in her behavior suggested anything else was going on. I might not trust Jimmy, but I could trust Julie. Hell, I trusted Julie for more than half my life. That night we made love long and slow. However, this was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, we managed to arrange only 2 dates when I was not called to work. Julie was annoyed and so was I. Unfortunately, while I was angry at my boss, she was angry at me. I was her husband, but I put work first. That was her opinion, at least. Hell, I couldn't even blame her for thinking that way. Cynthia went to the city more and more often when her parents moved to the big city. She would go away for long weekends whenever they needed something. She returned before one Sunday, and the next thing I knew, I got a call from her. Detective Wilson, I said, answering my cell phone. Cal, thank God, you need to get here now, she said, almost shouting at me. She was clearly upset, and I asked what happened. Just come to my house, she said. Not our house, my house. Were there any problems with Jimmy? I was on shift at the sheriff's department and told Barton that I had received a call from Cynthia and asked for the rest of the day off. He looked at me strangely, but just nodded and went back to his crossword puzzle. So I raced to Jimmy and Cynthia's house and was surprised to find Julie's car in the driveway, and the alarm bells in my head turned into full-blown sirens. Cynthia was walking back and forth in front of the house, and when she saw me getting out of the car, she ran up to me with tears in her eyes. My unmarked car was actually my car with a radio and sirens lights. I love my Dodge Charger. Cal, thank God you're here. I don't know what to do, she sobbed, hugging me tightly. Hey, keep it down, Sin. What's going on? I said in a soothing tone. She looked up at me, and I'm sure my confusion showed on my face as I looked between Julie's car and her. Suddenly, her face turned pale, and she covered her mouth with her hands. Sin, what's going on here? Why is my wife's car parked in your driveway? Don't you know? Her eyes widened in horror. Know what? What the hell is going on here, Sin? I started to get irritable again, and the alarm bells in my head rang doubly. Then it dawned on me. Damn it, I shouted, drawing my weapon and heading towards the door. I opened the door and walked towards the bedroom. I broke down the door and saw the picture. I blinked twice, looking at the frozen lovers. My heart fell out of my chest when I saw Julie naked. I took out my mobile phone and started taking pictures. I took 4 pictures before they came to their senses, and Julie jumped up from him. I can explain, dear, she said as I continued to take pictures with my cell phone. I ignored her, then turned to Cynthia, who followed me. Sin, did you know about this? I asked, ignoring my wife. Yeah, Cal. Hell, I thought you knew too. I didn't like it, but I knew Jimmy had needs when I was away. She blushed, but looked me straight in the eyes. You didn't like it, huh? And you thought I knew? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Yes, Julie told me that she talked to you about it, and since you often work on Sundays, she will be here sometimes. Cynthia began to cry again. I I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw them together. If you're so hard on sex, I'll take Zing home with me and have sex with her until she passes out. Is this right for you, Sin? I asked her. Heck no, you will not touch her. Julie and Jimmy seemed to shout it in unison. Cynthia looked at them with disgust, then turned to me. You know what, Cal? I want you to take me to your house and have sex with me. She winked at me. Fucking no. Jimmy jumped out of bed and took a step towards me. I pulled out my weapon and pointed it straight at him. Jimmy, don't be stupid. What's good for the goose is good for the goose. He stopped in his tracks and raised his hands as my Colt Python was pointed straight at his heart. How long have you been sleeping with my wife? 2 months, he said, his face contorted with fear and anger. Since the night I was called to Hunter and Sue's. I said, and he nodded. And did you use a condom every time? Yes, he said. I believed him, but I also wanted to hear it from Julie. And Julie, is it true? Did he use a condom every time he slept with you? I asked, looking at her, but my gun never moved from Jimmy's chest. Yes, it's true, now stop. I'm still yours, Cal, said Julie. I still love you, but sometimes I need someone else in me, and Jimmy is just the thing, Julie begged me. What? So you can have someone on your side, but I can't. I looked at her as if she had just fallen from another planet. I looked at Cynthia's black hair and eyes the same green as mine. God, she was beautiful too. My love for Julie had essentially blinded me to other women, but now that I saw how things were, I began to see sin in a different light. I looked at Julie again. You hate double standards, right? Now, that's a double standard. If you're going to cheat on me with Jimmy, I'll cheat on Jimmy with Sin. Fair, right? I shrugged, still pointing the gun at Jimmy's chest. I can't believe you had sex with her in our bed, Cynthia yelled at Jimmy. Honey, it's not what you think, Jimmy said. I told you so, and you agreed to let me sleep with Julie if Cal knew. It's just sex. But I didn't know about this, I shouted back. You knew I would never share her, especially with a cockroach like you, but you thought it would be okay, right? Oh damn, I was pissed now, and if I had gotten away with it, I would have shot them both right there. I looked at Zing. Babe, grab everything you need for a few days, I said, and Sin nodded and walked over to the dresser and grabbed a few things. I then turned to Julie. What's the real reason, Julie? Your job, you idiot, she shouted, going on the offensive. Her face contorted with anger. You work all the time on our dates, but at least Jimmy is here for me. Did you sleep with him in our bed? I asked calmly. The question took her by surprise. She stopped before she started, and her expression of anger turned to shame. I had my answer before she even said it. Yes, she said in a quiet voice. This will be a good start for the fire. I nodded simply. When were you going to tell me, Julie? When were you going to file for divorce? Cal, damn it, it's not what you think, but I love you. Julie went on the offensive again, as if cheating, but still loving me made it acceptable. No, Julie, you don't love me, otherwise you wouldn't cheat on me. Especially with him, I argued, and she didn't really have an answer to that. At least he used a condom, but now I still have to get tested for STDs. Sin, and he used condoms with you. Ever since they came to me a couple of months ago and told me they would have sex with each other while I was away, I've been forcing him to use condoms with me, she said, approaching me. As we talked, Cynthia's suitcase was filled with her toiletries and clothes. Fine. This reduces the risk of infection from them. I nodded. I knew that Julie was everything still on pills, but even so I knew Jimmy went back to high school. He was a hound then, and apparently still is today. However, as far as I knew, Julie was his first extramarital affair. She looked at Jimmy. I'll stay with Cal. If you want to stay married to me, stay away until I return. I can't believe you too, she screamed at them. She left first, and I stood back, pointing my gun at Jimmy to make sure he didn't do anything stupid. We managed to get to my car without incident, but on the way home my cell phone rang. I ignored the letter from Julie, but took one from the sheriff. Hi, Cal. What's happening? Jimmy just called. Sheriff Barton is Jimmy's uncle on his mother's side. Sir, your nephew has been sleeping with my wife for the past 2 months, and Cynthia found out that I did not know about it. As it turned out, she wasn't too happy with the situation either. I'm going to my house right now, and I'm taking the rest of the day and tomorrow off too. I gave him dirt. Oh boy, he sighed. I was afraid something like this would happen. Wait, do you know? I shouted into the phone. I'm so sorry, son, he started. Save it, asshole. I creaked in response. I ended the call before he could say anything else. Then I looked at Cynthia. Did you know that he knew? I asked. God, no, she said with surprise on her face. I can't believe this shit. She was still angry as hell. Okay, Cal, when we get back to your house, we need to have serious sex. The rage in her voice actually turned me on. You're damn right, that's what we do. I grinned at her. It was as if for the first time I saw her as a woman, and not just a friend. But first I need to make some calls and take care of some things around the house. Then I'm all yours. I promised her. Julie called again just as I was bringing Sin home. What? I said sharply. Don't you dare touch her, Calvin Wilson, she shouted into the phone. Either I'll sleep with her or divorce you. How do you choose? I have photographs, remember? I said. In our state, evidence of a wife's infidelity deprived her of much in the division of property in the event of a divorce. Julie fell silent. I even thought she had hung up. She then said, okay, before hanging up. I sent her a text message telling her not to come home tonight, then called a lock replacement service. The locksmith was my cousin Dennis, and I knew I could trust him. He looked at Cynthia in surprise when he arrived. Sin and I were just drinking a couple of beers when he came and entered the house. Hi, Dan, I said as he entered. What's going on, dude? He asked. I told him briefly and asked him to change the locks and give me 3 sets of keys. I also asked him not to give a set of keys to Julie if she came and asked. He immediately agreed. Blood is thicker than water, Cal, he agreed, and we shook hands. Dennis is one of the good guys, and I know I can rely on him for anything. I then called the furniture store and ordered a new king bed to replace the desecrated queen bed Julie and I shared. Zing waited patiently while all this was done, and the movers arrived soon after. They dismantled the old bed and took it out into the yard, as I asked, then assembled a new one at my request. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth it when I finished. You see, I had a plan. Actually, I had several plans. I just hoped that the most peaceful plan would be the one I could use. Dennis finished changing the locks and gave me 3 sets of keys as ordered. I gave 1 set to Sin, winking at her. She smiled back. The movers finished assembling the bed, and I paid them with a credit card. Then I called my sister Olivia, the bank manager in our city, and asked her to open a new account for me on Monday morning. After explaining the situation, I asked her to transfer 75% of the funds from the savings and checking accounts to the new account and thanked her. She was more than happy to help since she never really liked Julie. It turns out that Liv is a very good judge of character. Once everyone who wasn't living here or staying as my guest had left, it was just Cynthia and I. Instead of going straight to bed, I took her into the living room and we sat on the couch after I locked the house. Sin, what we are going to do is petty revenge. You understand that, right? I asked, looking into her green eyes. Yes, I know, Cal. I reached for her, pulled her towards me, and kissed her. Our lips parted for each other as our tongues slowly tangled together. I broke the kiss after a few long moments. God, Sin kissed better than Julie. Before we pass the point of no return, I need to ask you something. Took her hand. Sin, you deserve better than Jimmy, and you always have. What I don't understand is why you put up with his crap. Cynthia blushed deeply. He has complete control of the bank accounts. He said if I left, I would have nothing. He said he knew every lawyer in town, and not one of them would take my case. He's lying to you, honey, I said, kissing her fingers. Listen to me. Do you want to leave him? Don't worry about finding a lawyer. Just answer yes or no. Do you want to leave this cheater? Yes, but not just because of the cheating. He, she began to cry, then lifted the sleeve of her blouse to show me a bruise from a strong grip on her upper arm. I closed my eyes and sighed. Crap, I said, shaking my head. This added a new challenge to my plan. Given the good old boys club in law enforcement here, Sheriff Barton, and the DAW would be very reluctant to prosecute Golden Boy unless he killed someone. He will be able to get away with the years of abuse Cynthia endured. However, I now had information on the sheriff that not only did he know about the affair, but he facilitated it by forcing me to stay at work so they could have sex like rabbits for 2 months. Honey, listen to me. I'm certified in this state. Tomorrow I'll call a divorce attorney from my wife's rival law firm. We'll get representation. Sheriff Barton can't fire me, and he knows it. I sighed deeply. I'm so sorry for you, Sin. I've always loved you. You've been one of my best friends since childhood, and I'll be damned if I let that bastard hurt you again. With the photos on my SIM card, you'll have a case made in stone against him, and you will get everything. Her eyes lit up at this. Cal, will you help me, even though I knew about this dump? Yes, because you didn't know that I didn't know, and you didn't know how deep that hole was. Now that we know that, we need to be careful. I know Sheriff Barton, and I know that he probably got him into this mess. I'll talk to him tomorrow morning and let him know I'm taking the day off, I said. After we hire a lawyer, we'll go to the station together, and if you want, you can file a domestic violence report against Jimmy. But she began. Yeah, he'll do it after I show him the pictures. You see, until we actually get divorce papers on them, we'll keep the threat of divorce over their heads. That's my plan. We're essentially driving them into the corner and then activating the trap, I smiled, laying out the plan in front of her. This includes blackmailing their relatives too, and sending the photos to Julie's parents. By the time we're done with them, they won't have a pot left in their asses. I winked. Cynthia laughed musically. I like your way of thinking and remind me never to make you angry, she said warmly, then captured my lips with hers. After another long moment of our tongue games, she pulled away and looked deeply into my eyes. Cal, forget about sex tonight. I want you to make love to me. Her voice sounded so seductive that I felt every cell of my body pulsate with desire. It was new to me, wanting a woman who wasn't Julie, but Julie made her choice. She knew how I felt about cheating, but she did it anyway. Still, here I was, ready for some petty revenge before the real revenge began. No, this was no longer petty revenge. I've talked to Cynthia a lot over the years, and we have a lot in common. From our love of country and jazz to similar tastes in movies that even Julie and I didn't share. You know, Cal, if Julie hadn't captured your heart back then, I would have tried to win you back in high school, she admitted, blushing. If Julie didn't exist, I would rush to you, Cynthia Smithson. I replied, using her maiden name. At that moment, my phone vibrated. I set it to vibrate, and when I looked, it was Julie's number. I chuckled as I answered. What now, Julie? I asked irritably. Cal, it's not too late for us. We can talk about this, she said in her whining way, which I hate. Can we? Will you stop having sex with Jimmy? I asked. She started, but I ended the call and turned off the phone before she could call back. What did she say? Cynthia asked. She said, and that was all the answer I needed. I shook my shoulders. Then I hugged Cynthia again and kissed her tenderly. But enough about her. God, you're beautiful, I exclaimed quietly after breaking the kiss. I got up from the sofa and took her hand, leading her to the bedroom. The new bed, already made and with pillowcases on the pillows, looked very inviting. Cynthia, when this is all over, I want to try it with you, if that's what you want, I said when we undress each other. I want it too, Cal. Jimmy was never my first husband. She gave me a mischievous smile. I really like you. No, that's putting it mildly. I've loved you since we were children. She blushed even more. Cynthia, why did it take us so long? I asked as she pressed her naked body against mine. Cynthia is tall at 5'10", and she's sexier than a $2 pistol. She was a head cheerleader in high school, and that was the main reason she dated all Jimmy. I didn't know her size at the time, but she was the epitome of perfection. "Fuck our future exes," she answered in a whisper. "But now it's our time, Cal." "Damn right," I replied before capturing her lips in a passionate kiss. Our kisses became urgent, as if our lives could end at any moment. Cynthia, however, followed my lead and turned off her cell phone. I then unplugged the landline from the wall so that no one could contact us on the house phone. Then we made love. When we came to our senses, I rolled off of her and pulled her towards me. Our fingers intertwined as we lay there enjoying post-wedding bliss. "It was the best sex of my life," Cynthia purred. "Me too," I said with a smile that I thought would never leave my face. We looked at each other and kissed tenderly. "We need to talk about our next steps." She nodded. "Yes, we need to. I can't go back to Jimmy now. What we have is too special for me to ever be happy with him again, even if I were ever happy with him." Now I feel a little guilty. I was happy with Julie, or so I thought. But now, at least sexually, I have found true happiness with another woman. This made me think for a moment. Was this what Julie felt with Jimmy? While I certainly hated Jimmy and had hated him for years, I couldn't hate Julie anymore. I hated what she did to me, and she lost my trust forever. But now I understood what she was talking about. Then the anger returned as I thought about how my own boss had been involved in this whole mess from the start. He distracted me from Julie and gave his shitty nephew the opportunity to seduce her. Julie was far from blameless here either. She could have told Jimmy no. She could have stopped this at any time. We were both manipulated, but I was more deceived than Julie. I told Cynthia how I felt, and she had a look of guilt and sadness on her face. "I'm so sorry, Cal," she said quietly, stroking my cheek. "Honey, when Julie told you that I supposedly agreed with this, as she described it, what was my opinion about it?" I asked. I needed to know what lies Julie was telling. "She basically said that you share my feelings, that even though you don't like it at all, you'll accept it because you know she has needs," Cynthia said. My anger at Julie grew again. I nodded. "Okay, I'll look into this like a detective and find out all the angles." Then I told her my plan. She laughed when I finished. "You're one sneaky bastard, but I love you regardless," she said, her eyes sparkling with joy and love. "And you are the embodiment of a Greek goddess," I said. "And I love you too." We spent the rest of the day making love and, yes, eventually having hard sex as we both felt angry at our respective spouses. "Okay, honey, let's take a shower and then I'll make us something to eat." She smiled, and I happily agreed. After the shower, we dried ourselves off with towels and went to the kitchen where Cynthia prepared pork chops and vegetables. She used a few different spices she found in her cupboard, and the chops turned out delicious. The veggies smothered in cheddar sauce were great too, and we were both soon full. We sat at the table and discussed our future plans after we finished eating. I complimented her on her cooking skills and told her the honest truth when I stated that she was a much better cook than Julie. She blushed and smiled back at me, accepting my compliment, and I kissed her tenderly. For a moment my plan stalled in my head as I discovered that I no longer hated Julie. Yes, she was a scoundrel and a cheater, but she, albeit unintentionally, brought me and Sin closer together. No, the thought of how she rode him, how she never liked to ride me, was enough to bring back my anger and the promise that she would get nothing from me, except what the court might be willing to give her after presenting those photographs as evidence. Yes, I had a plan, but it would take a little time to iron out all the details and get the process going. When we went to bed, it was in each other's arms, which Julie hated doing. She loved her space while sleeping. In contrast, Sin was someone who loves to cuddle, and I love that. One of the real blessings of our upcoming divorces was that we were both child-free. As for Julie and I, we just weren't ready yet, she said. She wanted to save some money from her job as a paralegal before trying to have a baby. Sin, on the other hand, simply didn't want to have children with Jimmy and told him so. She said that after everything he had done in the last 2 months, she was damn glad she had resisted his urging to stay home and have kids. Cynthia works as a real estate agent and basically sets her own hours, and with the real estate market booming in our once small town, she's doing the killing. The goal was to get money out of the joint bank account she had with Jimmy. I wanted to involve Liv, but I didn't want her to suffer the consequences if things went south. Zing had sales receipts and payroll from her job. We will sue for her salary and bring him to light in any case. So with our plan in hand, the next morning we got into the car and drove to the lawyer. We spoke to Phil, Liv's husband, and my brother-in-law, and he took our case for a nominal fee. In other words, he took the job for a pittance and the chance to pin Jimmy against the wall. Yes, Jimmy once attacked Liv, and Phil didn't like it. It became obvious that, with the exception of his own family, Jimmy did not have many friends. Phil drew up divorce papers for both spouses, and I sent him copies of the pictures I had taken the day before to use as evidence. The time code on them was enough evidence, and with their admissions about the duration of the scam, it gave Phil leverage to draw up the legal documents for each divorce. He agreed to get real dirt on them and send them subpoenas on Tuesday. After our visit to Phil's office, we went to see Sheriff Barton. "Hey, Bart," I said as I walked in and kept my tone calm and a smile on my face as Cynthia followed me inside. I sent him photos on his phone and told him it would soon become clear why. I looked at Zing. "Show him what you showed me yesterday." I nodded towards her hand. She lifted her sleeve, showing the bruise from the grip. "Jimmy does this to me almost every day. Well, did it because I'm not coming back. I want to file a report against him." Well, this might be difficult." He started, but I interrupted him. "Bart, if you don't want these pictures to end up on the internet and hang on the wall at City Hall, you will arrest this bastard yourself and put him in jail. Then you will go to the district attorney and tell him that you need to bring charges in court for domestic violence. I know that without this pressure, his shit will be hushed up as usual. I don't want to do this, but I will if I have to," I stated clearly. "Now I want to know your full involvement in Jimmy and Julie's scam. If you don't tell me, these photos will still become public, with your name as an accomplice." Sheriff Barton was on pins and needles, and he knew it. I secretly turned on the recorder in my pocket just before he started talking. "Ah, damn, I'm sorry about all this crap, Cal." He grimaced. "I should never have let Jimmy and Fred talk me down." "And the mayor too? How did they do it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "He said that he and Julie were in love and that he needed to get you out of the way so he could be with her." This made me raise my other eyebrow. I was pretty sure Jimmy was lying at that moment, but I couldn't be 100% sure. "Continue." I nodded. "So, it started the night I called you to go see Hunter and Sue. Jimmy said that although they are in love, they don't want to go through a messy divorce and want to stay married to both of you." He took a deep, shaky breath before continuing. "Then he said that they agreed with both of you that when you are at work or away, they will be together, and I thought that was the end of it. Well, I mean, I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to take any chances. I knew Cynthia knew, but I kind of thought you didn't know, Cal. Blood is thicker than water, so I kept quiet and gave you every fake challenge I could find. Damn, you have no idea how sorry I am about this." From the look on his face, I believed him. It didn't change the fact that he had betrayed me, but I was reconsidering my plan to bury him so deeply that he would never work in law enforcement again. "I considered you family, Bart. You probably didn't feel the same way about me," I said, shaking my head. "No, this justice must be complete. No, it's not about revenge anymore. This will be justice for all. Everyone will get what they deserve." I sighed and asked him another question. "Who else knew about this besides you?" I asked, and he took on the expression of a deer caught in the headlights. "That's the same look on Julie and Jimmy's faces in the photos I just sent him. Remember, answer the truth, otherwise everyone will know about your participation." As a detective, I have almost achieved mastery in detecting lies. The only one I couldn't read was the woman I'd been married to for 10 damn years. She deceived me well. Barton, by contrast, was an open book. If I tell you, will you leave my name out of it? Will you erase the recording on this device in your pocket? He said. Give him credit, he was attentive. As a detective, he had to be one. Then I made the most decisive decision in Barton's life. I turned off the recorder and erased it in front of his eyes. You're out of the game, Barton. I nodded. I was going to give it a chance, but not completely. He still had to face his family after I was done. He will still be able to work in law enforcement. Now tell me who else knows that I was deceived. I hissed. Only Fred and Jimmy and the other men of their families. He said, and then regretted using the word men. I knew where the copies of these photos would go. I smiled at this, and he turned pale, realizing the full extent of his mistake. Crap, he muttered under his breath. So the mayor also knows and supports this. So does Judge Green. I nodded. This was confirmation of his previous statement. This was one package sent to their wives with the note, "Your husband knew about it." Janet Green was a good woman and a friend of my parents. They were friends even before she married Fred Green, now the mayor of our city. Alice Green, Judge Green's wife, was grumpy, but she also deserved to know that her husband supported what was happening. I thought it was strange that Julie hadn't tried to call me today, but the moment had barely registered in my head before my cell phone started vibrating. Indeed, it was Julie. Detective Wilson. I answered as I usually do when I am on duty. Cal, are you at work? She asked. Yes, I'm in Bart's office doing paperwork. What's happening? I maintained a casual tone. Are you ready to talk? She asked. What should we talk about, Julie? I asked. That I still love you. She said, that I know you still love me. This took me by surprise. I realized that even though she betrayed me, I still had feelings for her. When do you want to talk? I asked. I can take the rest of the day off, but you won't be able to get into the house. I changed the locks. I told her. Will you let me in so I can get my things? We could talk then. She said. I agreed. No problem. Cynthia will be there with me. She's at work with me now. I said. I thought this would be a good defense against temptation. I looked at Zing and she looked worried. Okay? I heard all the tension in the world in that one word from my wife before she hung up. I looked at Barton. Anyway, who else knows besides the mayor, you, Judge Green, and Jimmy that they cheated on me? Nobody else. He nodded. And Cynthia is here too, he said, trying to get her involved. She already told me, and the reason is because Jimmy controls all their money. I hissed. Now will you send the evidence to the prosecutor's office? Bart took out his digital camera and took several pictures of the bruises and other injuries on her body. He then checked them and sent them to his computer to compose and send them. Yes, it will be sent today. I'll email this after I pick up Jimmy. He nodded. He had to do it because he was the only one I could trust other than me to keep quiet about what Jimmy had done. I'll be silent, okay? Until the time comes to not be silent. Fine. The sooner he is taken off the streets, the better. I would go myself, but you know. I shrugged. I did not want to be associated with his arrest, especially after his affair with Julie became known. Yes, I know. I don't like what you do, but what he did to you is unforgivable in my opinion, and beating his own wife is not what I signed up to protect him from. He will go to court for this if I get anything for it. If he were not a relative, I would not have helped him. You have to believe it, son. Said Barton. It touched me. I have known Sheriff Stanley Bart Barton all my life, and until yesterday I respected and liked him very much. I still loved him, but my respect had diminished due to his betrayal. I believe you, Bart. I nodded and then stood up, Sin standing next to me. Now I need to give Julie her things and kick her out of my house, I said and shook his hand. Will you be at work tomorrow? He asked. No, I'm officially taking 5 days off starting today. I'll be back next Monday, I said, smiling. Okay, sounds good. He smiled, and I had a feeling that after the dust settled, he would be fine. But I'm not done yet. As promised, I emailed all the JPEGs to Mayor Green and Mrs. Worthy Green and synchronized it with Jimmy's arrest at the hands of his uncle. When we got home, Julie was already waiting. Sin and I walked up to the door holding hands and just looked at Julie. There was an expression of jealousy on her face. "Hi, Julie," Cynthia said. "I enjoyed the fact that I spent the night with my husband. I could have asked the same thing, bitch," Julie snorted in response. Now that I've compared them side by side, Sin beats Julie to the punch. Yes, yes, ladies. Julie, what did we say about double standards? I asked calmly, smiling at her mockingly. Remember, if you hadn't slept with Jimmy, I wouldn't have slept with Cynthia. This stopped her for a moment before she began her answer. I continued, Julie, what is there to talk about? You showed me how much I mean to you yesterday when you rode Jimmy Needle. No respect, no love, only contempt. Instead of showing any true remorse for what you did, you first tried to justify yourself, then attacked the mod's work. Now take your things and leave my house. Julie, if you don't like its size, I'll be happy to take it for myself, Sin said with a satisfied smile. Yes, we rubbed Julie's nose in this one, and damn, it felt fun. Julie could no longer hold back her tears, and the floodgates opened. I'm so sorry, Cal, she sobbed. Now she was actually crying, something I had only seen a few times before. I screwed up. No, you messed up downstairs. Jimmy beat Cynthia, did you know that? I looked at Sin, who showed a bruise on her upper shoulder. I remember her wearing heavy makeup to church, and now I could imagine the bruises under all that makeup. I remember I didn't think much of it at the time and told Jimmy that she wore too much makeup. Less than a week later, I noticed that she began to wear it less. This was probably Jimmy's sick, twisted mind hitting her where it wouldn't be visible when wearing regular clothes. Oh God, I'm so sorry, Sin. I did not know about it. Julie had an expression on her face as if she had seen a ghost, or perhaps a vision of the future if she had left me for Jimmy. There's nothing you could have done, Jules, Sin said with a shrug. It's over now, and I'm not going to lie. I'm going to do what I should have done years ago and divorce this scumbag. I'm going to fucking ruin him. Me too, I said, looking at Julie. It was time to dictate the terms of her surrender. Julie, it's over between us. I am filing for divorce and demanding 75% of our joint assets. This will be enough for you to buy your place, since the house is in my name and belongs to me by right. You can leave your car, and I'll leave mine. We'll divide the rest 75 by 25. If you argue with me, these photos will go to your family, my family, and anyone else who might be interested. I prefer it to end quickly and cleanly, but I will play dirty if necessary. There will be no turning back. You and I will finally separate. You already know how I feel about cheating. Before I even slept with Cynthia last night, you cheated on me with Jimmy for 2 whole months. My only consolation is that you made that bastard Jimmy wear a condom, so I probably don't have an STD. Julie stopped crying. But I love you, Cal, she begged. No, Julie. If you loved me, you would respect me and respect our marriage vows. As far as I know, when I saw you yesterday with Jimmy, I divorced you then and there. All that's left to do is make it official. You'll get a summons at work on charges of infidelity. My lawyer already has photographs as evidence and will present them in court. I paused to let my words sink in, then continued. Julie, will you give me a divorce so we can move on with our lives? She lowered her head, completely defeated. Yes, she said in a quiet voice that showed that she had lost. Thank you. Now let's get your things together. After today's revelation, I don't think you'll want to go back to Jimmy, especially since he was just arrested for domestic violence. I said. Why, yes, you're right. But where should I live now? She asked. I left enough money for the down payment on the apartment and a little on top. It was a joint account, but I put 75% of the account in my name only and took my name off the joint account, so now it's all yours. I shrugged. I hope everything works out for you, Julie. As much as I want to hate you, I just can't. We've known each other for too long, but I cannot and will not forgive what you did to me, to us." Julie came to her senses. She was in obvious pain, obviously, but I remained adamant to her. It was very difficult, but I did it. Damn, part of me wanted to just hug her and tell her everything would be okay, but I knew better. If she loved me, she would have stopped sleeping with Jimmy when I asked her if she could do it. Damn it, if she loved me, she wouldn't have slept with him first. This thought was all I needed to finally strengthen myself before her sadness and significant charms. Yes, if you looked at it objectively and not with a heart full of love, she was no comparison to Cynthia, all things considered. But that didn't stop her from being beautiful in her own way. Cynthia helped us pack all of Julie's things, and it still took a hell of a lot of time. By the time we finished, it was already dark, and we were all exhausted. We collapsed in the living room, most of our suitcases filled with Julie's things. Her closet was cleaned out, her dresser, her nightstand, her makeup table, and her master bathroom sink. Well, you get the idea. I didn't realize you had so much stuff, Jules, I said, grinning despite myself as Cynthia came in and handed us both a beer before sitting down on my lap. Julie looked at us with a look of desire on her face, this time without jealousy, just with the feeling of what she lost. Well, it's been over 10 years since I moved here, and you know I never throw anything away as long as it's wearable. Julie shrugged, and I couldn't help but grin again. I know, okay, I grinned. Jules, it's late. You can spend the night in the guest room if you want. Cynthia leaned over and whispered in my ear. Is this a good idea? She whispered. I don't hate her, Sin. No matter how much I want to, I can't. I don't love her anymore, but I still kind of care about what happens to her. I whispered back. Then I looked at the hopeful expression on Julie's face. Jules, it's just for one night. You can spend the night in the guest room, but tomorrow morning you will pack your car and remember, you will be served with divorce papers at work. I reminded her of reality again. Julie sobbed. Is this really necessary? She asked finally. Should we just go to your lawyer in the morning and I'll sign everything in his office? I thought about it. As much as I wanted to humiliate her, I also remembered the good times we had together. Damn memory. I looked at Zing and raised an eyebrow. What do you think? Is it worth it? I asked her. Cynthia looked at Julie, saw the utter despair in her eyes, then looked into my eyes. I think she's suffered enough for now, and yes, I think this will work. I looked at Julie. Okay, we'll go to Phil's office in the morning. You will sign the documents there, and we will ask the judge to officially divorce us. We won't have to go to counseling, and we won't have to worry about dividing custody of the children. So don't worry. Julie had a faint smile on her face. She escaped my wrath. For now, the dust has not yet settled, but the explosion has not yet occurred. I see that you have already replaced the bed, she said, her voice still small and full of remorse. Yes, I needed to upgrade it anyway. I didn't know at the time that Sin here likes to cuddle with me. If I had known, I might have chosen a bigger bed. I smiled and couldn't help but tease Julie. She visibly cringed at my ridicule. I really haven't been such a good wife, have I? She said, probably feeling the full weight of her decisions. No, you were a good wife until you decided to cheat with another guy, but a bastard like Jimmy Green. You knew how I felt about him. You knew he was out to get you all along. You knew I told him once that if he hit on you again, I'd make him pay. Well, it's his day of reckoning. If you don't want to end up in the kill zone, I advise you to leave the city as soon as possible after finalizing your divorce. I told her in a calm tone, emphasizing each I knew. Julie had a look of fear on her face. What do you mean, Cal? I mean what I say, Jules. Look, I don't hate you, but there's a storm coming. When the mayor himself allows his son to have someone else's wife, knowing that his son is in the wrong, the consequences will be serious. It is not illegal that he knew about it or even allowed it with his blessing. But what is really illegal is that he scheduled me to work on a Friday night when I usually have that day off. And he knew exactly how to keep me busy on Sunday. I was lying through my teeth now, but it was to protect Bart. At least Bart had a conscience, and that would protect him when I unleashed this all over the city. Julie's eyes widened in horror. Oh my God, Jimmy used his father to get us both settled. Everything fell into place, albeit in a strange way. Look, Jimmy wasn't a bastard by accident. He looked like his father, who claimed to be the biggest bastard in the universe. Mayor Green was definitely a bastard, and has more than proven it with his actions lately. Yes, Mayor Green was number 2 on my list, right after Jimmy Green, but before Judge Green. Bart was able to get himself off the list, but I had a feeling he wouldn't completely escape punishment. I took out my cell phone and called Phil. "Hi, Cal? What's happened?" he asked when he answered the call. "Change of plans, Phil. Julie will come with me and Sin tomorrow morning, and she will sign the documents right in your office. Does it suit you?" I informed him about the change of plans. "Of course, I don't see any problems. Let her bring her lawyer, though. I don't want this to come back to haunt us in any way," he said. "Okay, I'll tell her." I nodded. "Thanks, Phil." "No problem, bro. I will help you," he said, and then ended the call. I looked at Julie. "Bring your lawyer tomorrow morning when we go to Phil." Julie just swallowed and nodded. After we finished our beers, we went to bed. Julie stayed in the guest room, and Sin blocked the door behind us as we went to sleep in our bedroom. I had a strange feeling that Cynthia and I would be sharing this bed for the rest of our lives. That morning, Julie called her lawyer, and he met us at Phil's office. After explaining the whole situation, he looked at her in surprise, but said nothing as he looked through the divorce papers. When he was finished, he handed the documents to Julie. "This is the best offer you can get, Jules. Take it and run." This was his advice. Julie, God bless her, took his advice. 30 days later, after a cooling-off period, we officially divorced. Divorcing Julie wasn't a real battle. No, the real fight should have been with Jimmy Green and his dad and uncle at City Hall. But thanks to the letter I sent to their wives, we have an ally in Janet Green. Alice Green did not answer, and I assumed that she had her own plans for justice for her husband. Judge Reinhold saw the evidence, and Jimmy was arrested without bail and placed under house arrest in his home, given his past history, which was hidden until recently when his mother revealed it, revealing himself to be not only violent, but prone to escape. You know, Jimmy had a huge trust fund thanks to his dad, and now that trust was targeted by Phil, who represented Cynthia in her divorce from Jimmy. Jimmy was stupid enough to fight the divorce, so Phil brought out the big guns, targeting the trust fund. When Jimmy confessed, he was placed on probation but remained under house arrest. It wasn't ideal, but we'd have to settle for it for now. I received a call at work from Cynthia, who was now living with me full-time, saying that Janet Green had come to our house. I said I'd be there, told Bart that his sister was at my house, and he just nodded and smiled. I hurried home. When I arrived, Cynthia and Janet were drinking coffee in the living room. "I'm here, ma'am," I said as I walked in, after kissing Cynthia hello. "Cal, good to see you. Thanks for that informative email, by the way." She smiled apologetically. "If I had known that my son was doing this to you too, with the full knowledge and consent of my husband, I would have stopped it." "Ma'am, not many people knew about this." I shook my head. "It would be unfair to say you should have known. My brother knew and contributed to this." Her voice turned steely. "My husband knew and contributed to this. My brother-in-law knew and contributed to this. This creature, who calls himself my son, has crossed all boundaries this time, seducing someone else's wife and then using your own family to cover it up. Well, let me tell you, I will do my best for you." She nodded. I somehow assumed that she would be on our side, perhaps, but I didn't count on her vowing to help us. "Thank you, Janet." Cynthia hugged her future ex-mother-in-law. "Any time, honey," Janet said with a smile. "Do you think Phil will take my divorce case?" she asked me as Cynthia sat back down. "I think he can be convinced." I nodded and smiled. "Mrs. Green." "Janet, Cal, you should know that by now. She smiled reproachfully, like a true matron. Okay, Janet, I hope you don't think less of me for being with Cynthia now, I said, a little worried about her reaction to our relationship. Nonsense, Cal, she laughed. You two deserve to be happy, and after what Julie and Jimmy did to you two, I'm sure you're destined for happiness. Now I know I could sue Jimmy, his father, and maybe even both of his uncles for alienation of affection. But why? It's a crap claim in most cases and nearly impossible to prove. No, I had much better things in mind for Jimmy and his father. After all my investigation into how, why, and where this happened, I have come to the conclusion that Mayor Green conspired with his son to destroy my marriage. Search was one of the charges I was thinking of filing, as well as conspiracy by an intermediary. The judge, knowing this, was only guilty of not telling me what I needed to know. Julie no longer had anything to do with Jimmy and moved to another city shortly after our official divorce. Her boss got her a good job in another city with an old friend from law school. She took my advice and left the area before the storm destroyed everything. Bart cooperated fully with me throughout and apologized to his sister for his role in the incident. He finally confirmed my suspicions that Mayor Green personally told him that if he didn't go along with Jimmy's plan, he would lose his job as sheriff and be replaced by an idiot of the mayor's choosing. Despite his shortcomings, Bart has always been an excellent sheriff. Any replacement candidate Mayor Green chooses would be a detriment to the police force. So it happened that one night Bart and Janet had dinner with Cynthia and we ate amazing fried chicken that Sin herself had cooked. Yes, she is amazing in bed and can cook, and Jimmy abandoned her for Julie. Well, it depends on the taste and color, as they say. After dinner, after drinking some beer, we discussed the plan. I laid out the main points and said that the schedule was moving up a bit, so that Mayor Green could be served with the divorce papers first. Our whole city was on the verge of a big change. The first step was to contact Phil and find out what his private investigator had found out. I called him, and the report was good. He collected a lot of dirt on our famous mayor and his worthless son. Janet went through self-recrimination about the way she raised Jimmy, but after we reassured her that he was his father's son, she finally calmed down. I couldn't blame her, really. She told us how her husband over time turned from a kind, wonderful man into a vile tyrant. I thought about the old saying, "Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely." It was fitting for Mayor Green and the way he ran our city. Ultimately, with his son as his go-between, he showed everyone that no woman was safe from them. I felt sorry for Julie when I found out about this. The taped conversation made me feel sick when Phil played it back for us in his office. Mayor Green, just divorce her, Jimmy. Give this bitch what she wants, and I'll send her out of town. Jimmy, but Dad, she just can't divorce me. She's mine, and I can do whatever I want with her. Mayor, Jimmy, let's wrap this up. People are starting to talk, and we need to settle this as soon as possible. Don't worry about Cal. I'll get him fired and run him out of town. We need to get rid of Cynthia along with him. You've done enough already. Jimmy, how can you say that, Dad? You yourself told me that Julie is ready for me to fuck her. You made Bart give him extra hours and calls. Meyer, well, you're the one who let her get away. Jimmy, I was in prison, in case you forgot. How the hell was I supposed to know that Cynthia would turn me in for correcting her? This bitch needs to die. Mayor, don't worry about Cynthia. I have plans for this bitch. Just take care of yourself and stay away for now. Jimmy, okay, Dad. Just make sure she doesn't lead to a divorce. Make it look like an accident. Phil stopped recording at this point. I looked at Cynthia and Janet, then at Bart. That's enough to prove collusion, Bart said, and Phil nodded in agreement. Bart then looked at me. Do you want to do this, son? I smiled and checked my Colt. I'd be glad to, sir. Then I looked at Zing. Honey, stay here with Phil. Bart and I are going to go deal with these mad dogs. Cynthia hugged me tightly and kissed me passionately, putting her whole soul into the kiss. Be careful, dear, she whispered. I love you. And I love you too, darling. I said, smiling at her reassuringly. "Don't worry. Bart and I will succeed." We got into Bart's car, and he turned on the lights and siren as we sped to Mayor Green's residence, where Jimmy now lived. Along the way, he called Judge Reinhold and obtained a warrant for their arrest based on the private investigator's notes. Gotta love the Patriot Act. When we arrived, Mayor Green was just finishing dinner with his son, and they didn't even hear us when Bart turned off the siren. We drove up to the mansion and entered with guns drawn. Bart proved he still has skills when he broke down the door. "What the hell is going on?" Mayor Green demanded. Jimmy just looked at us with pure horror on his face as he saw my 357 and 44 Bart single-barrel military revolver pointed at them. I covered Jimmy while Bart moved forward and filed charges. "Frederick Green, you and your son Jimmy Green are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. If you waive this right, anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to a lawyer and to have a lawyer present during questioning. Do you understand your rights as I have stated them?" Bart relined his Colt and cuffed Fred from behind, making sure the cuffs were securely fastened and the keyholes turned away from his hands. He then sat the mayor on a chair and covered Jimmy while I read him his rights and also handcuffed him. Once we were both handcuffed and in the back seat of Bart's car, we turned on the lights and sirens again and raced back to the station to process them. Jimmy, displaying rare resourcefulness, kept his mouth shut. Once Fred was placed in the cell and Jimmy in the interrogation room, I went in with Cynthia. I threw the papers in front of him and played the recording of his actual confession of plans to kill his wife. Jimmy listened to all this, then paled noticeably. Every drop of blood turned to ice in his veins as he realized how hopelessly deep he was in. "Uh, this cannot be allowed in court," he tried to object. "It doesn't matter, Jimmy," I shrugged. "Public opinion is important here. If we invoke the Patriot Act, suspecting that you and your father are harboring domestic terrorists, and show the Department of Homeland Security this conversation, it could easily be interpreted as planning an execution in an act of terrorism." I was heavily hinting, but I had a hell of a lot of fun doing it. "What do you want me to do?" he asked brokenly, realizing that he was at a severe disadvantage and that a great inconvenience awaited him if he did not cooperate. "As soon as your lawyer arrives, you will sign this paper, transferring all rights to Cynthia. He will certify it, and then it will go to the judge. The judge will give Cynthia everything. You'll go to jail for domestic violence, and then you'll be free to start your life again, whatever it may be. Do you understand how this will happen?" I asked, and he nodded in response. It was really nice to see the golden boy get dusted off. "Man, I'm sorry," he cried, for the first time I've seen him. Jimmy Green cried. I looked at Cynthia, and she looked at me, both of our faces showing complete shock. Then we exchanged smiles and looked back at the sobbing, apologetic Jimmy Green. "Shut up, Jimmy," Cynthia said sharply. "You and your shitty father were going to kill me. You're just sorry you got caught." This brought Jimmy out of his funk as he finally realized how in trouble he was, and his brain practically shut down. He just stared at the wall between where Sin and I were sitting. When his lawyer arrived, I played the tape for him, and he closed his eyes and let out an exasperated sigh. When I laid out my plan to send it to local news channels and even major networks, he was able to snap Jimmy out of his self-induced catatonic state and get him to sign the divorce papers. We had the same success with Fred Green, and he signed without a fight as soon as his lawyer arrived. And since we never said in writing that we would withhold evidence if they cooperated, we still sent copies of the tape to the news stations, the 3 major networks, even one to Fox News, and then sent a copy to the state attorney general's office. It was like a small thermonuclear explosion in our quiet town. There were news cars everywhere, and law enforcement from regular cops to the FBI swarmed our little town, and the hotel business was booming. For a small agricultural community, we bought a ton of money into the town coffers, and it turned out to be a hell of a lot of fun for everyone, except Jimmy and Fred Green. The feds dug deep and found some questionable tax practices in Fred's past, and strange things in Jimmy's daily dealings at City Hall. When the dust finally settled, Bart was cleared of all charges, although Jimmy and Fred tried to pin the cheating scandal on him, but he came out clean. Julie was called to testify about this whole mess and was a bit vilified by the news assholes until I put things right and portrayed her as a victim too. She was young and naive. I was asked in an interview if we would make peace with her, to which I gave a decisive refusal. I wasn't going to change my mind. Cynthia got everything in her divorce from Jimmy, and Janet got everything in her divorce from Fred. For their role in the conspiracy and other charges the feds found to bring against them, they received significant prison sentences. They will most likely die in prison after all convictions and sentences have been determined. Cynthia and I got married, and her parents came back to town for our wedding. Julie arrived, bringing her new boyfriend. I talked to him, and he turned out to be a really nice person. Surprisingly, I was happy for her. Well, Jimmy has found love again, so I heard through the grapevine. His cellmate turned out to be a very large, but at the same time very loving man, as it turned out. The noises from Jimmy stopped after his 6th month in prison. Jimmy's uncle, Judge Roy Green, was also investigated along with his brother and nephew, and the feds found some irregularities in his cases and convictions. It turned out that he took bribes and engaged in other fraudulent activities. It also turned out that Alice was the one who turned him into the feds. I wonder why. Either way, he ended up in federal prison after Alice left him high and dry in their divorce. As for Fred, the former mayor, he became the star of many prison musicals, usually singing the soprano role. Julie married the guy she brought to my and Cynthia's wedding, and now they live in the city. Last I heard, she was expecting a baby. Good for her. Bart retired and is now living his golden years with his wife. They are now an empty nester, and he still shows up at the office occasionally. And I became sheriff after our new mayor was elected. Mayor Barton is a divorced woman who, when her ex-husband abused his power, rebelled against him, thereby gaining the trust of our city. Yes, Janet took her husband's place and made me sheriff after Bart retired. So here I sit, several years after that fateful day when I was called out on my date with Julie, now holding my baby son while a very pregnant Cynthia feeds our 2-year-old daughter, and life is good. We turned the guest room into a nursery, and our little one now has her own room. We have 4 bedrooms, and Cynthia has already made up her mind. This will be the last child. She plans to get her tubes tied after giving birth, or as she puts it, the baby factory is closing, but the playground is staying open. I love my wife. End.